Yo, what's up guys, welcome to the first video of the new series called Gameplay Analysis or something. The series where you can send me your gameplay and I will look at it and analyze it, and I will point some things out and give you tips so you can improve. If you want to be in the next video, check out the description below so you know how you can submit your own gameplay. So let's get right into this gameplay. The gameplay is from Mike Yanko, and in today's video, the focus is on Stam management, buff uptimes, and skill prioritization. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So he told me that he's playing in Fury, Bomb Pirate, and Skeleton Pirate in medium. And if you're playing in medium, you should always use shuffle. There's a possibility that he has not shuffle unlocked since his blade cloak is also unmorphed. But the reason you should always run shuffle in BGs or in open world especially is because the current meta is a snare heavy meta, so you need some kind of snare removal, or otherwise you will get perma snared, you will get perma slowed, and when you can't move or when you can move only slowly, you lose the ability to kite, to line of sight efficiently, and therefore reducing your damage taken significantly. So you need either forward momentum, shuffle, and relying only on dodge rolls to counter routes is unreliable, because you can't dodge roll slows, you will still be slowed after a dodge roll, so you still can't really efficiently kite. And in this case, I would just drop Blade Cloak for shuffle, because they both give the same buff, major evasion, and the damage you get from Blade Cloak is not worth it to use it, so Blade Cloak is actually just a alternative source of major evasion if you're running heavy. So if you're medium, always use shuffle over blade cloak. So the next thing I want to talk about is buff uptimes and skill prioritization. And in this exact frame, he wants to go in, he's preparing a subterranean into a bird so he can burst them, but he's not really prepared for an offensive burst, and it's really risky to do one if your defensive buffs are not up before that. So if we check his active buffs at that time, we can see that he has no Ice Fortress running, so he loses a lot of mitigation as well as mana protection. His rally is about to time out, but luckily it just went off when he needed it the most, so he survived the incoming burst, but it was super risky, because if the rally would proc before the burst, he would lose a lot of the burst heal he would get otherwise, and he would be in a really dangerous situation. And before you engage into the enemy, you usually want to cast an Vigor for you and for your teammates, so you have some pre-heals when the counter burst or counter damage from the enemy comes. And because he didn't use Ice Fortress before he engaged, because he didn't Vigor before he engaged, he's forced into a defensive ultimate to heal himself up. And because of the late break free, but I think it's because lag he couldn't break free, since you see him break free instantly later, but still because of that he's not able to drop a Dawnbreaker and successfully burst the enemy team. But he reacted well and didn't continue to go offensive and tried to go for the kills, so he had a good skill prioritization there, realizing that his life is in danger, and heal himself instead of greeding. So after this burst attempt, he tries to pressure someone, but he got counter pressured, and again, because he has almost no defensive buffs active, he receives more pressure than usually, but again he reacts well and goes into defensive mode and disengages. If your health would be lower, you usually want to cast rally first, so you get a huge burst heal, so you survive the execute damage, and then you want to Vigor, but in this case it's fine to do the other way around. But then he starts to kite, that's fine, but he kites into an open field, so he just wants to run away. But if you get pressured, if you need to kite, you want to kite somewhere where the enemy can't hit you, in other words, line of sight the enemy. And in this case, you want to either kite to the left, to the boxes. There's a good kite spot there, you can run around the boxes and there's a small gap between the wall and the box. Or kite to the right side, to the pillar, and hide behind it, and analyze the situation for yourself, and then make your next decision. And regarding your teammate's position, the right side would be the better decision, because after you run away, you're in a far position and you're not able to support your team with vigors and other defensive buffs. And since you're playing in a more tankier setup, even though you're medium, you still have Skelet Pirate, you can still stay in the fights longer than, for example, a full medium build. And you can continue to support your team, help them with healing, and reducing therefore the chance that your team gets killed by the enemy team. And maybe you can even turn the fight with your Dawnbreaker. So the idea that you have to kite is good, but you have to still work on the execution. So don't completely disengage a fight and line of sight near your teammates. So right now he used Shimmering Shield when he's completely out of a fight, so you don't really want to cast Shimmering when you're not sure if it's gonna proc, since it's really Magicka intensive if you don't get the refund back. So in this case, rebuffing your long duration buffs would be more efficient. For example, Ice Fortress, so you have your defensive buff active for sure, and it's not a 50-50 that you get major heroism, for example. And yeah, that also goes into buff uptimes. I know that on console it's harder to track your own buffs because you don't have access to these fancy add-ons, and the base game buff tracker is really garbage. But one thing you can try to do is cast your Ice Fortress every time you cast your Netch. Their uptime is quite similar, and the visual of the Netch is easy to keep track, and that's, for example, one way to have a better buff uptime. Now you can see that your guy is alone, and kiting on the right side earlier would be the better choice, hiding behind a pillar, and still be able to support him. Luckily he doesn't die. Then he sees another offensive opportunity, but the same thing happens again. He engages with 0 active buffs, but in the end it didn't really matter because the enemy had 0 counter pressure, but it was still a quite risky move. One thing that I like is that he knows his offensive rotation when playing dual wield with Bird as a spammable and Spin to Win. So you always want to do a sub-train into 2 birds and then a Dawnbreaker and a Spin to Win spam. So the next thing besides buff uptime and skill prioritization I want to talk about is stam management. And he wrote me that he knows that his stam management is bad, and that's good that he realizes that. So let's talk about how to get better at managing your stamina. So first thing I notice is that he runs a lot from A to B, even though the running is not necessary at all, because it didn't really matter if he was there 2 seconds later or not. So you can save a lot of stamina when you just walk in situations that you can just walk, because when you sprint your stamina regen is cut off and you spend stamina, so you lose stamina and get 0 back. So in most situations you try to avoid sprinting, especially if you already have less than 10% stam. You want to avoid sprinting completely and only sprint in situations where you need to line of sight quickly, when you have a lot of pressure on you. So you try to relieve yourself from pressure by line of sighting. Another thing that helps you managing your own stamina is using pots on cooldown. I know that pots are expensive and some people don't have a lot of money, but if you want to be good at PvP, you need to use pots on cooldown because they give so many benefits and you would miss them all if you would not use them on cooldown. So I recommend you to run CC, stamina and health potions if you have another major savagery source already, and use CC, stamina, crit potions if you don't have them. So on Stamden you can run Green Lotus and get the crit from there, so you can get off with CC, stam and health potions. The stamina you get from potions is really helpful, as well as the CC immunity helps you to save stamina by not break freeing for 10 seconds. And if you want to push yourself, you can even time your potions with the CC immunity buff from break freeing. So that means that if you break free, you wait 5 seconds and then use the potions, so you maximize the CC immunity duration and save the maximum amount of stamina by not having to break free. So he tries another offensive opportunity. This time most of his buffs are up and he only misses rally, so he could try to go in, but somehow he can't CC break even though he has almost full stam, and he dies. I don't know what was going on there. But another tip I like to give is even though you do an offensive rotation, even though you go in and try to kill the enemy, you should always weave your defensive buffs. So for example, you go in with a subterranean, bar swap cancel it, use the Shimmering Shield for example, swap back, do a bird, and if they're not one-shottable with Dawnbreaker, do another Vigor so you can stay longer in the fight. So what I'm trying to say is, if you go in, don't just go subtrain into 5 birds, but weave some other skills, especially defensive skills, if you know that you can't one-shot them, especially if you don't have Dawnbreaker. So the more you play Stamden, the more you can understand your situation, and the more you play around to your defensive buffs. And in the end, you get tankier, you will have more damage, etc. Another thing that helps managing your stamina is to keep up food. Unluckily, he plays around like 2 to 3 minutes without food active, and he realizes too late that his food was out, and therefore his stamina sustain was horrible. But if you see that you have 18k health, check food. But I'm pretty sure that it doesn't usually happen, but it's just a reminder. And the most important thing about stam management is to have a tag weave in between abilities. So there's 2 kind of builds. There's either a low stamina regen sustained build that relies heavily on heavy attacks, or there's a heavy stamina regen build that can sustain without doing heavy attacks. So for example, a Stamblade open world build. On Stamdom, you want to try to invest not a lot in stamina regen and rely on heavy attacks to be able to sustain. Personally, I run Serpent Moonstone and 1 regen glyph in non-CP as a non-red guard that has sets on that give 0 stamina recovery. And if you're a red guard, I would still use Serpent, but then run 3 weapon damage glyphs. But this is my personal sweet spot, and it depends on how many heavy attack weaves you want to do in combat and how reliant you want to be on them. I know someone that runs an orc with 3 weapon damage glyphs and warrior moonstone, and he's able to sustain or borderline sustain his stamina, but he has to heavy attack weave 24/7, else he's out of stamina. He has more damage, but he struggles to sustain sometimes. So you need to find out how much stamina recovery you need to be able to play your playstyle. But you should always rely on heavy attacks to sustain your stamina partly. So what is heavy attack weaving exactly? You can see him doing it sometimes, but he needs to do it more often, and that is doing, for example, a subterranean into a heavy attack bird instead of doing a subterranean into a double bird. All the things you can do is, for example, when you try to gap close or when you walk to an enemy, you can open up with a heavy attack into a subterranean instead of a subterranean into a bird, and just like use heavy attacks in between skills and not light attack weave. You will lose a bit of damage, but the benefits you gain are far superior than the small damage increase you get from light attack weaving. So that's the big tips I can give about stamina management. And the next thing I want to talk about is again skill prioritization. And you can see him getting chunked down, and he decides to use a Dawnbreaker instead of a defensive ult. Not sure if that was a bar swap lag, that he couldn't bar swap then ult and just ulted by accident, but it's more important to prioritize your own life than an enemy kill, for example. In the end he dies, but it's not that important since his team is hard winning. So when he comes back, he goes in hard, and then he uses an early healing ult, and this healing ult was really good because you can see that he's 1 versus 4 and his team is not near yet. That means if the enemies try to chunk him down, burst him down, he would have a hard time surviving. Proactively played defensive before he had to play defensively super hard. So that was a good decision. One thing he should work on is, like I said before, the positioning. Especially if you walk into 4 enemies, you should always stay near a wall, near some kite spots you can always go back and line of sight to, instead of face tanking them on an open field. In this case it really didn't matter because the enemy team are not that experienced, so the incoming pressure is quite small, but the more pressure the enemy have, the less time you have to react, and the better your chances are of surviving if you're already near a wall, so you can line of sight faster. So he gives an heal ult for a teammate and shares a vigor. That was good decision, knowing where his team is and supporting them. But the next 30 seconds showcase you stamina management and buff up times. While he's fighting, he should always heavy tech weave to be able to sustain stamina. Try to keep your stamina around 40% at all times, so you have stamina ready when you need it the most. That's when you have to kite, play defensively, keeping up your buffs so you take less damage, and that means that you can play more offensively, and the buffs are mostly Ice Fortress and Vigor in this case. And you can see that he's only using Vigor when he's pressured, when he's below like 50%, and Vigor can be used proactively as well. So that means that you have Vigor up around like 80% of the time, so the chances that you get low are again lower, and you get tankier in the end. The kiting in the beginning of this fight is quite well. You run around the post so you don't face tank the two guys behind you, but when he needed to kite the most, he decided to run into the open field like in the beginning, so everyone's able to hit him, so he has zero line of sight opportunities. So in this case it would be more efficient to kite at the left pillar like he did before, or kite down to the below part of the bridge and then run up again and keep kiting around pillars, so he's still able to line of sight the enemy and relieve some pressure from him. Also, while kiting, it's really important to heavy tech weave. So for example, you run and you turn your character around when you pass the pillar, so you can sustain your stamina with heavy techs. I know that on console it's harder to control the camera, but it should still be possible to do it. And you can hear him spam Vigor, but he has zero stamina, so it would be more efficient to do a Shimmering Shield or a heavy tech, so you get the stamina back, and then use a Vigor with the stamina you got. So what can we learn from this case, from this gameplay, and where exactly can he work on? So summarized, he knows his offensive rotation with a dual wield bird setup with spin to win, but instead of going all in an offensive rotation and spam Steel Tornado, it's more important to weave some defensive skills while going offensive, for example Shimmering Shield and the Vigor, and proc the backbar weapon damage enchant every 5 seconds, so you try to keep up the 450 weapon damage you get from an infused weapon damage glyph. The most important things he need to work on is stamina management and weaving heavy techs in between abilities. So instead of spamming abilities, instead of using 2-3 birds in a row and light tech weaving, he should use heavy techs in between birds, heavy techs when he starts a fight. So for example, if he needs to gap close, he starts with a heavy tech into a subterranean instead of a subterranean into a web 1 bird. Keep up your food buff and don't forget to refresh it. And use potions on cooldown. If you don't have a lot of money, at least use trash stam pots, so you get the 8k stamina around every 45 seconds. But if you wanna be a good PvPer, you need to buy the expensive good pots, for example CC, stamina and health pots, because the CC immunity you get from the pots enables you to not to have to break free for 10 seconds and therefore save a lot of stamina by not break freeing. And if you do all that, you still need to find your sweet stamina recovery spot. For me it's Serpent Moonstone plus 1 regen glyph as a non-red guard, but it's different for everyone, so you need to find your own sweet spot. And the last thing that's important to work on is buff up times. The incoming damage was quite low, so he doesn't need that a lot of defensive buffs, but you should always keep up your defensive buffs even though you think you're safe, because you never know when the enemy team does ult burst and chunk you down hard. So it's better to have your defensive buffs up at that time and sacrifice a bit of pressure you can get from using one bird more. And then like work on the build, use shuffle instead of blade cloak if you're medium, but preferably you should always play Stamden in heavy, because it's so much more worth to use heavy on Stamden in my opinion. And once you understand all these things and you're able to pull it off reliably, you can work on the next higher level things. For example, personal positioning, line of sighting efficiently, team play, team positioning, play around the well-known sandwich position, and overall play more as a team. But it's really important to understand the basics and work from there. So that was it for the first gameplay analysis. I hope you liked it, and if you want your gameplay to be hosted here, check out the description below. You can see how you can submit your gameplay to me. Join my Discord, you can ask me anything there. I even have a chat channel where I update the newest meta builds for all the classes. It's like a budget website, and I will update you on what I'm testing, etc. on Discord as well. So check out the Discord link below. This was it for this episode, and I hope to see you again.